Greetings. Today I wanted to make a World of Warcraft expansion tier list, but first I have to make a few changes to this list. So that's a little more like it. I also included some World of Warcraft Classic relaunches of the original expansions, I suppose, the OG ones, because I feel like in regards to some of them, you kind of do need to, like, thinking about World of Warcraft Vanilla, the original. You do have to kind of think about Classic a little bit as well, but you can still kind of grade them differently, I think is fair to say. And I'll go ahead and just start off with Vanilla. I did start playing during Vanilla. I started playing in April 2005, which is about 6 months after the game came out, the original launch. And to be honest, I didn't really play the game enough, although I did like it. I was more busy with some other stuff at the time, like I was playing, I was still very young. I was in school, playing other video games, playing my Halos, my Call of Duties, all that other good stuff at the time, Smash Brothers. And while I did start playing in WoW, it wasn't really great enough to grip me into the world yet. Although I still did get like decently far at the time. I got like my original warrior that I still play today, Treggyz. He was made during this time, and he made it to like low level 40s, if I remember correctly. So just enough to kind of get like a decent grasp of like, a good portion of the game, but never quite got to end game at the time or high level rating. And it just kind of, I was sort of just busy with other things. I was still in school. I guess I was in either elementary. Actually, yeah, I'm pretty sure I was still in elementary school at the time. Thinking back on it, it's like, yeah, I was probably only 9 or 10 years old when original WoW launched. Good times. And I was also like, at the time, I was also busy, like, again, with like other video games is like kind of like my main pastime. I liked to read a lot then, as well as like I also played hockey at the time. So kind of like my time was pretty split up. Not a whole lot of time to play WoW, even though that would change somewhat soon. Although, sadly, not in time for Burning Crusade, the proper launch of it. I did play at the Burning Crusade's launch, but I really barely did anything. I remember making like, your Blood Elf Paladin, a Blood Elf Shaman, or not Blood Elf, excuse me, Draenei Shaman, kind of like going about like kind of the low level things. Like I was kind of like a real bad, I was a really a non-committal altaholic at the time, so I played lots of characters. I'd level them up to like level 10, 20, and then I'd kind of just like delete them or restart or something. Most of the time I'd delete them, but I really can't talk too much about Burning Crusade because I just never really played it. Although I will talk more about Burning Crusade when Classic Burning Crusade comes back around. And now we get to Wrath of the Lich King, and I think this will be little to no surprise to some people, but for me, Wrath of the Lich King was when I got fucking gripped into the game real bad, just like Death Knights would Death Grip. And like I didn't get to play at launch. We didn't have like a working PC, or at the time our family laptop. Yeah. It wasn't really all that powerful enough to play when Wrath came out, but a couple months later we got a slightly better laptop, and that's when me and my brother got back into the game, essentially. Although he had been kind of committing, he'd still been playing. He rated at like max level. I never did, but Wrath of the Lich King was when that changed for me, because this was the first expansion where I finally capped out a character. I capped out not just one character, but I also capped out my Death Knight first, of course. Surprise, surprise for any Wrath baby. But second was my Paladin. And then finally my Warrior, all three of which are the characters that I play primarily today. So those characters have a lot of history behind them. Going back, 10 plus years, 15, 14 years. It's been a good ride for them. And Wrath of the Lich King was the expansion that like really grouped me in, just because like I mainly remember doing like low level questing, and you finally hit that you hit that good old Wrathgate cinematic, and holy shit, that was pretty mind blowing at the time. It really grabbed me into the game. I was like overnight hooked on like the story. It was just like, it was like such a good presentation of like a lot of like lore at once that, like I could have been already into the lore beforehand if I just read the quest text or read more books or anything. But it was only with Wrath of the Lich King and that cinematic that really changed that for me. And again, I got to max level, so I actually did do some raiding. The only sad thing about Wrath of the Lich King at the time, at its original launch, is I never actually did Ulduar. So, and that's kind of like widely regarded by lots of people that I've heard over the years as being World of Warcraft's best ever raid, and I never did it. Never, sadly, but some things happen. I remember doing like the normal kind of like raiding experience, doing Nax Ramus, like Obsidian Sanctum, the Eye, etc. Like all the kind of like start of expansion raids. Like I started playing around Ulduar. That was like my main problem. I started playing around the Ulduar patch launch. So essentially that was still like the highest level content. So while that raid was getting progressed by other people, I was like getting caught up doing the lower level raids. And by the time I finally was caught up, it was still kind of like, it was kind of over. And I think at that time was when Trial of the Grand Crusader came out. Like I kind of took that long to progress or something like along those lines. I can't remember fully, but something like that. But I remember doing all of Trial of the Grand Crusader, maybe not. And also when I talk about any raiding at this time, it was all on like normal. I never did any heroic raiding as far as I remember. I might have done like the first few bosses on heroic and ICC, but I really don't particularly remember the specifics. I was only, again, maybe at this time 11, 12 years old. I'm not sure the exact timeline for me, but yeah, I was still a soft, spongy-brained kid, so didn't pay much attention. But Wrath of the Lich King, again, for me, it changed my life. It was great. And also, whenever I do rank any of these expansions, this isn't like necessarily, I think, like Wrath of the Lich King like made the game like 1,000 times better compared to like Burning Crusade or anything. It's just like, this is kind of just like me looking back at like that time in my life and being like, no, this expansion was super good, or it was at the time not great, or whatever. And now we move on to Cataclysm. So for me, I don't think like some people think Cataclysm was really bad, but for me it wasn't all that bad. It wasn't all that great either. I'd put it B tier because Cataclysm was my first real like proper expansion launch where I was there, I was ready, I had for the most part the right gear coming out of like ICC and Ruby Sanctum. I was ready to go hard and hit that grindstone and get to the new level cap at 85 and do all the stuff. And I remember doing like heroic dungeons and stuff. I did a little bit of raiding at the start of Cataclysm, but I would say I was like a very casual raider during Wrath of the Lich King. During Cataclysm, for me, it was the tables turned a little bit, and I kind of went back to like Burning Crusade times where I was sort of like, I did play the game, but I kind of went back to like my Call of Duties and other games at the time, the other things I was interested in. So I still did a little bit of raiding. I remember definitely doing I can't remember the name of it, but the Blackwing Lair, whatever, the one with Onyxia and Neltharion in the pit, the big worm boss at the start, and the golem council thing. I remember doing that raid. Not very well. I seem to recall pretty much getting carried all the way through it, but still. Firelands, I never really did Firelands. I remember doing like the spider boss and like the trash boss, the rock guy steering them around, but none of the other bosses in there. I never did Alishazor for sure. And Cataclysm was also when like LFR came out. I remember for Dragon Soul, for the next raid. And I I did do all of Dragon Soul on LFR, to no one's surprise, being, there was very low levels amount of commitment. You just had to, have the baseline eye level to get in or whatever. I'm sure even that's how it worked at the time, is you just had to be level capped and not in terrible gear. But yeah, I played a decent amount of Cataclysm. It didn't really grab me in as much as it maybe should have, but just for me, it was like I was excited for the expansion, and it just kind of didn't quite pay off for me personally. I know some people, it's probably a good expansion for them. Other people is even worse, but for me, it's sort of just like kind of middle of the pack. Not amazing, not bad. Just kind of like another progression of World of Warcraft at the time, and also kind of another expansion to talk about that's in similar vein. Although I'm a little torn on Mist of Pandaria, because I remember really liking Mist of Pandaria at the time, even with all of its quests and stuff it like came out with, but all the dailies, I should say. But I didn't really do any raiding. But I remember playing the expansion pretty regularly throughout, even I wasn't necessarily doing like all the right content. So I think for me, I'm kind of like I would just like, it would either be like top of B or lowest A if I had more picks. But I think for now I'll leave it in A. Mist of Pandaria was like another good expansion for me in that like it was the first expansion I remember I bought myself, because I'd gotten a job like during, like just before it came out, and I was like 15, 16 at the time. I actually got to earn my own expansion buying it myself, and it was kind of just around high school time for me. It was like a decent amount of free time, kind of more. I was, growing up and kind of more focused on what I wanted to do at the time, even if maybe a bit ill-spent in that regard, because it was lots and lots of video games. But yeah, Mist of Pandaria was good though. I remember like I pretty much did all of the raids on LFR. I did a little bit of normal raiding. I did like definitely like the first few bosses on Mogashan Vaults on normal mode, but other than that, I don't remember doing a whole lot of raiding in that expansion, although I might have either bought myself a heroic Garrosh or I did like normal level Siege of Orgrimmar progression. I can't remember fully, but that was a good time. Like Mist of Pandaria, for me, looking back on it, was pretty solid. Even though it's like some people think it was bad for the game, other people think it was like the best expansion. Like definitely one thing I've heard, like other people who are maybe more aware of what's going on, they were saying, like I've heard other people say that Mist of Pandaria was like one of the best times for like class fantasy, or like maybe it was like class gameplay gas. But for me, yeah, like Mist of Pandaria was solid. I played it all the way through. I remember that without much, I didn't like have any like downtime. Not that I recall. Although of course it's like this is looking back to events of 10 years ago. Maybe I misremember, but looking back on Mist of Pandaria, I thought it was great. Now, onto another favorite of people's. I think this is the one that people aren't going to be too surprised by, but WoD wasn't. I think WoD on its launch was on the actual launch experience, like day one, was awful. Everyone, even on like my like low to medium pop server, the servers were dead like day one. There was no way you could really play the game. The garrisons kind of sucked. Things happened. Like I remember WoD mainly as a. It was an expansion that for me it was good for my sleep schedule, because what I ended up doing during WoD is I remember waking up most every day around like 7 or 8 a.m. like just before the daily reset, and doing all my WoD, all my garrison dailies on my characters, and I did that essentially for like a year. I mean, on and off. I probably did take like I remember taking decent breaks during WoD. I I might have. I think I did like the raids, like LFR, and that's probably it. I don't think I did. I didn't actually. I know firmly I didn't try to do anything on normal raiding or like mythic dungeons. I think those were introduced later on in a patch, but I never did any high level content at all in WoD. It just didn't really grip me. I thought the leveling experience was pretty good. It was probably had like the best leveling experience of any WoW expansion. That would be like the only redeeming factor for me. But WoD was just it was just sort of there. It I'm sure there's other people again, some people think it was even worse. Some people think it was better. Like I've heard WoD had some of the best raiding. If you enjoyed raid logging, I should say. If you didn't do anything else besides raid, you probably really liked WoD. But I did not, and it was just I was just there. I feel a little bad. Like I don't think it was necessarily harmful to the overall game, but I don't think it necessarily pushed it forward at all. And I think that's like a general thing I share for any expansion launch. So I don't necessarily think any expansions were so bad that they actually like brought the game down overall. Like that's just my personal opinion. And now I get to move on to World of Warcraft Legion, and for me, this is another very easy pick because Legion for me at the time when it came out was it was essentially the huge redeeming expansion at this time. I had over the course of the last few expansions, Cataclysm, Mist, Warlords of Draenor, I had nothing better to do besides just like kind of level up characters, because again I was playing those expansions extremely casually. And by the time Legion came out, through the artifact system and like the class halls, the class quest, essentially, I was ready to do like all the content in Legion, and for me it was life changing, kind of. Legion was just amazing. I essentially like sat down and I was like, I'm gonna do everything. And in addition to just like playing every single class, doing all the class quests, Legion was the first expansion where I essentially started like seriously raiding. And by serious, I should say like I started doing like casual, ahead of the curve, heroic raid progression, notably with my guild I play with now, Evade. This was around the time Evade kind of came about in that way. I should mention during WoD I had gained like mutiny control over the guild Evade. It was originally on a Shattered Hand. During WoD was when I got to I was given the chance to like do the guild mutiny thing, and yeah, I took it over. Sort of maybe not necessarily the greatest thing to have done to the original leadership of that guild, but I mean at the same time the option was available to me, so who was I really hurting? And I think Evade is kind of come around, you know, even if it's no longer the same guild, it's still kind of at least it's alive. That's how I kind of look at it. But so yeah, like during Legion, I had met people and they were interested in bringing Evade back, essentially from the dead, because it had been a high level raiding guild on the server before that they were interested in essentially just taking the guild name for. And I kind of let that happen. I became just an officer in Evade. I was not a great officer during Legion, but I was an officer to some degree. And yeah, Legion was a great time. I think it had really solid rating. Like, sure, maybe Emerald Nightmare was a little easy and boring, but it was overall, I think, transformative, and I think for the better of the game. I think it added so much sort of like class fantasy and so much like kind of flavor, a lot of transmog with the weapon, all the appearances and everything. It was fantastic, and I think I wouldn't actually like move the things around, but for me personally, I think Legion was the best expansion just overall. But I'll kind of leave the order as is, you know. But personally, Legion was just fucking great. And moving on to another favorite of people's to bash on, although I don't necessarily feel the same about BFA that like lots of other people do. I think BFA was sort of a troubled expansion in some of the things it brought in, but I don't think it was like some of the other stuff that happened to me during the course of the expansion was like so good that I look back on BFA fondly. Like I'd almost put BFA up here just because like due to essentially some of the friendships and stuff I made during the course of BFA. Like the expansion itself wasn't amazing, but I met some of my best friends during BFA and stuff like that. So I'm really torn on which rank to put it at. I think I'll leave it at A though, just because BFA might have been harmful enough to the game to be like what even or B tier, but I think for me and like just again the some of the people I met during BFA and some of the friends and like the content, the level of content I started playing at during BFA, like I'd been again pretty casual up until Legion. Legion was my first expansion doing like head of the curve for like raiding like regularly every single tier. BFA was the expansion that kind of took it to the next level, where not quite mythic cutting edge level, but I still like we pretty regularly did mythic content in every single raid. Going into BFA, we did a little bit of mythic in Legion, but not enough to really earn that. Whereas BFA, I would say that was where like things kind of stepped up, and I made some of my best friends that I still play World of Warcraft with and other games at the time. Like I met the majority of them during BFA, so I can't really knock the expansion down because I feel like in that regard it actually was pretty beneficial to me. Make up your mind, Raven. Raven's being a pill. She likes to jump up on my desk whenever I'm recording or talking to stream. It's sort of troublesome sometimes. But yeah, for me, BFA was good. Not necessarily the game, but like everything else kind of happening around the game was, for me, beneficial. So now moving on to everyone's favorite that I think is also kind of easy to judge, but I'm a little torn. I think what I'm gonna do. I'll do this. Oops. Keep that the same. I think Shadowlands belongs in its own level. Oops, why is that doing that? I am all over the place. Shadowlands was an expansion for me that was like not all around that bad. I don't have as bad of an opinion looking back on Shadowlands as other people will, but I still do think like the bad things that Shadowlands did to WoW, it would be limited to sort of the fact that like at the time like Blizzard was kind of anti what players wanted, and the fact that like covenants were locked. Like you couldn't freely swap your covenants until like more than halfway through the expansion and stuff. And like looking back, like I think Shadowlands, like over the course of it actually got much better. Like to be almost like B tier or even A tier, but it's still like I think like the start of Shadowlands was like so bad and like Torghast and all that stuff. It was sort of detrimental to the overall kind of growth of WoW. And Shadowlands is just sort of Shadowlands. There's not much to talk about. It's still pretty fresh in most everyone's mind, so I think it's easy to rank. It's on its own its own like kind of middling tier for kind of hurting the game, kind of just being there, being in the maw. Like, oh, that's the other thing is like having to do maw dailies and like maw content at the start of the expansion, and you couldn't mount in there until you earned one of the the specific mounts that could mount in the maw. Terrible. Terrible. What else is there even to talk about? I should have talked more about some of the raids in the other expansions, but actually, yeah, I did kind of I kind of skipped talking about raiding in Legion and BFA. Like Legion, Emerald Nightmare was like fine. It was like my first real, head of the curve, like first earned head of the curve. I remember I actually did get my first ahead of the curve in Hellfire Citadel in WoD, but it was definitely bought for the the stupid moose mount. I kind of had gotten some gold over the course of that expansion, so just sort of bought it. Didn't think about it, but Legion changed that. Another reason why I like Legion so much is because like I started really playing the game at the time. I think the only time during Legion that was sort of a rough patch to an extent was maybe Tomb of Sargeras, specifically for my guild, because I remember that was kind of like a rough tier. But I mean, I still think we got ahead of the curve like relatively quick, or at least like quick for our level, to the best I can remember. But and Antorus, I remember Antorus was a time when I actually had to take over tanking because our other tank had become unavailable. So I ended up playing Prot Warrior a lot of that patch. The Prot Warrior was pretty fun though, because it had like it was like a Legion artifact effect where like you effectively healed your party based on like your rage spent or something. It was something like that. And Prot Warriors were like top healers, or at least for me in my raid, I remember being like a top healer technically. It's a combo of yourself and the rest of the raid. It was a wild time. BFA. I'm sorry for kind of going out of order with like my list, but I kind of like glanced over it and I was only thinking about it when I was thinking about Castle Nathria in Shadowlands, and I was like, I didn't even talk about BFA or Legion raiding. But Uldir was a time. I think Uldir wasn't a great raid personally. I think it was sort of it was that first raid where they did like the kind of shared class, or not class, but shared armor sets for everybody. And I remember kind of just feeling a little demoralized that the gear turned that way. Like looking back on the old year set, I think it isn't that bad looking. Like for plate, I should say, it isn't all that bad, but it still was like, it wasn't really all that exciting to go like farm it to a degree. And Battle for Dazara Lore, oh, man, I loved that raid personally. Battle for Dazara Lore, if I were to do like a raid ranking, it'd probably be in like my top 3 or top 5 raids of all time. I fucking loved that place. I think it was actually like, that was like one of the hype times of BFA for sure. It's like that and season 4, but that patch in general was great with like the Mythic Plus season of Reaping and everything. Oh, so good. And then like going back, like I think the next patch in BFA, like the Ajara's Palace, Eternal Palace, I think the raid itself was kind of bad, and like the Mythic Plus season that came with it was also kind of bad. But I still think Nashatar, is that right? I think it is called Nashatar. I don't want to look it up. But like that zone, like the underwater-esque, like the walls of water around the zone. I think that was like some of the best open world content World of Warcraft's ever had. Or at least for me at the time, it had been. But maybe I just kind of enjoyed like earning my crab mount, so I look fondly back on like that more than anything else. So I'm sorry I keep kind of like messing with my eyes. Just kind of got like a scratchy eyes today. And then I guess Nyalotha was a continuing forward. Nyalotha was a really good raid and a good time for WoW because I mean, sadly for the rest of the world, that was around the time like the COVID outbreak happened, and what essentially happened for WoW and for me, and I imagine a lot of people, is essentially all your friends are just always available to play, and you could just sit and do Mythic Plus as much as you wanted. You could raid as much as you wanted. I remember raiding in Nyalotha on like 5 or 6, 7 characters. Like that was probably the most raiding I ever done. Like in one patch was during Nyalotha, just because like I had a lot of free time, just like a lot of other people. And Nyalotha was also a raid tier where I can't remember quite. I think I remember taking over like raid leading early on in the tier, and we actually had one of our fastest ever ahead of the curves. Now that was maybe more so from like having access to corruption gear and all that, but we had like a week 3 ahead of the curve compared to like our usual like 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks compared to previous expansions, previous raids. But it was a good time. And for Evade, it was also like the first raid where we had like very serious mythic progression rating. We got all the way up to and killed Mythic Raden in Nyalotha. Sure, this might have been a few months after the patch launched and everything, and we were fully kitted up to our eyeballs and in corruption gear, and like perfect corruption, perfect gear, and lots of like perfect statted. All like everything was in our favor, sure, but that fight was still pretty hard mechanically, so it was a pretty like nice accomplishment to kill that. And also like as a personal thing for me, Nyalotha was the first raid I don't want to say earned, but it was the first raid I got a cutting edge mythic achievement for killing N'Zoth on Mythic. One of my buddies, his guild was missing a 20th person for the night, and he invited me. And within like 3 or 4 pulls, we killed it, and I got cutting edge for it. Didn't earn it, but I was there. I was present. I helped. And yeah, just again, like I should have mentioned this during like talking about BFA properly, but yeah, BFA and Legion were just good times like that for me, and like lots of like it's not necessarily like some BFA wasn't really a great time for WoW, but it was still like a good time for me personally, and lots of great friendships and stuff. And now we can get back to Shadowlands. Shadowlands was similar, but also kind of a step back in terms of like that stuff for me. Early on in Castle Nathria, we one of our other officers in the guild, he essentially just started like mass inviting people to the guild, and it kind of caused the guild to have like a drama blow up during Castle Nathria, and we kind of never recovered from that over the course of the entire expansion. So like I look back poorly on Shadowlands for that reason. We still got ahead of the curve in every single raid, but it was still kind of just like a kind of a rough expansion for my guild. But stuff happens, and it's kind of I think it like in the long term gains of the guild of Evade was at least we did get rid of at least one toxic officer at the time with that happening. So it was sort of shitty at the time, but maybe, nowadays it's, it was probably for the best that something like that happened. And yeah, so Castle Nathria was like a great raid, but yeah, that stuff happened during the initial progress of it. So kind of like for me, even though Castle Nathria, looking back on it, like especially like for like the Fated season at the end of the expansion, I think Castle Nathria was like itself, it was a very great raid. Some good fights in there, maybe some weird fights, but like Sludgefest and Sire to Nathrias might be like top ranking raid bosses for me personally. So Sanctum of Domination. Oh man, I think Sanctum of Domination also had some good fights in there, but it also had some of the worst fights in there as well. And I guess we could even say, like, or at least I'll say specifically, some of the worst phases of like raid boss fights we've ever had. Personally, looking back on it, I think Sylvanas, the end boss of Sanctum of Domination, if her fight had been just like either if it had only been just phase 2 and phase 3, or just, in my ideal opinion, just phase 3, I think that would have been like an extremely solid end boss for a tier, because it was always kind of demoralizing going through like 9 minutes of fighting to then wipe in phase 3 due to like a small mistake. But I still think, looking back on it, phase 3 as Sylvanas was great. Kind of like I guess I'm kind of like a simple-minded warrior in the fact that I like kind of simple, soft enrages of a fight where like, oh, there's just nowhere else to fight this boss, or stuff like that. So like kind of like having those platforms just like get, eventually clouded out, fogged up, and you can't fight on those platforms anymore was I think it was good. And at the time, not really a well-received fight, but I think that specific phase of the fight was great. And then talking about moving forward into Sepulcher, I really liked Sepulcher. I think it'd be one of my like another like top 5 raids I ever did. Sepulcher was also like the first raid where I had fully stepped up to raid leading, if I remember right. Like I'd done it a little bit here and there throughout the patches whenever like our other raid leaders at the time had to step away from the game, but Sepulcher was my first, and maybe not necessarily the smoothest progress, but I'm still, even now, 2 years later, I'm still learning a lot as a raid leader, but I'm definitely getting better. And I still think Sepulcher was a great raid, looking back on it. Maybe only like 2 fights in there that sucked, but everything else was great. So like watching the race to World First at the time, that was probably like the most hyped race for me personally. Just good times. And then also kind of looking back on Shadowlands, Season 4 Fated or whatever was kind of an interesting experiment with like, they essentially brought in the current Dragonflight Mythic Plus system of like bringing in old dungeons and bringing it back for Mythic Plus. I think it's a great idea, as well as like kind of revisiting the entire expansion's raids, because even within the course of a single expansion, 2 years after it launches, there's no reason to ever go back and do Castle Nathria. There's no reason to ever go back and do your Vault of the Incarnates, your Emerald Nightmares, your Uldirs, right? So I think doing that, do I think it's like a great like end patch always, like for a full length season of World of Warcraft? No, maybe not, but I think for Shadowlands it was a good idea as like a stopgap between the end of Shadowlands and the start of Dragonflight. So yeah, I think Shadowlands. I'm kind of like looking back on it. I'm almost tempted to move Shadowlands up, but no, I still think it belongs in its own level. Shadowlands was just that kind of expansion. Although another sort of, for me, personal positive thing, Torghast, playing Torghast on a warrior was the right call. Like pretty much all expansion, because essentially you had pretty good like buffs that weren't necessarily over the top overpowered, but like still pretty fun gameplay, at least for me personally. Maybe not everyone will look back on it that way, but I personally did not mind Torghast, even though that's like the real breaking point for some people because of the legendaries in the expansion in Torghast. I seem to have a thing where I get 40 minutes into a recording and I kind of just start losing my mind almost. Can't talk this solidly long. All right, moving on to the last official, the current and last World of Warcraft expansion. I think this one's easy for me to rank. Dragonflight's definitely an A-tier expansion. Even though we're not fully done with it, we're couple weeks into 10.2. Yes, that's the correct expansion. Of Amirtisol, and my guild we just got ahead of the curve in the raid. But looking back on the entire expansion, I think Dragonflight's been a good step forward. Like I think Dragonflight could almost go on its own tier as well, like Shadowlands, but as in like a good like positive sort of like culture change with Blizzard in regards to World of Warcraft content. I think Dragonflight's like absolutely fucking killed it in a good way. Just like I think like the changes that we've gotten in the game with like the crafting revamp, the Mythic Plus seasons, I think maybe not every season has been like particularly great, like season 2, but doing like the Shadowlands season 4 experiment and doing it over the course of the entire expansion, I think has been a net gain for World of Warcraft, just in the fact that there's so many great expansions in the game that we never play, or they're essentially all dead content when there are some fantastic dungeons from years and years ago that can be simply updated and brought back. Maybe not all of them, like Throne of the Winds in season 2. Like I particularly did not like that dungeon, but yeah, I think Dragonflight's been overall pretty good. Looking back on the rating for Dragonflight, Vault of the Incarnates was indeed a raid. I think there was some good fights in there. Like I particularly kind of liked Aranog and Taros, the big rock guy. I think Aranog was a pretty solid first raid boss. And I also think the council fight in there was kind of dumb in how quickly you could wipe yourselves, but it was also like a pretty solid council fight. And like it also helped that it had like some of the best loot on it in the entire raid. It was on the second boss of the of said raid. Vault to the Incarnates, getting ahead of the curve in Evade was an ordeal, to be honest. Looking back on it, we effectively lost a couple of weeks of raiding because the expansion came out late November. The raid didn't open until mid-December, and for us in our guild, it was like 1 week. It was like 1 to 2 weeks of raiding, and then we just stopped raiding fully for 2 weeks because of Christmas and then New Year's. So we had a very slow kind of ahead of the curve. I mean, I guess it, like, compared to Shadowlands, it was about the same, but it was like for the rest of Dragonflight since Vault, it was definitely our slowest. It took us 11 weeks to do, which has kind of been my personal goal. And we definitely kept up with it in both Abyss and Amir, so we got ahead of the curve in week 5 in both both tiers afterward. Looking into the next patch for Dragonflight, Abyss. This is all like pretty fresh info on my mind. It's pretty easy to rank the expansion for the current expansion. Abyss was I think there was definitely some troublesome bosses in there. I particularly didn't really like doing like Ziskarn and kind of Echo, at least as far as doing mythic progression on that fight. Abyss was the first raid where I earned myself cutting edge with I started raiding with another guild on the weekends and a side of evade, and earned my first cutting edge there. Overall, pretty proud of that. Although, again, maybe not greatest performance at times. I've memed myself in videos over the last few months about one of my first ever Vault videos that I had like properly edited. It was I essentially just like roasted myself for like 10 minutes. my like Magmrax parse, because I got like no joke, I got like a 5 parse on Magmrax, and we never re-killed the boss again. So I never actually got to fix that parse, because we kind of, at that point in the raid, we were just extending our lockout. Good times. Maybe I'll get to fix it in Season 4. Maybe, but yeah, sorry if I do want to leave this part in, hopefully in the edit, hopefully I don't cut myself out, but kind of like talking, like just like kind of straight up talking like this for this long, I'm kind of like getting a little scatterbrained, like thinking back on all this stuff. But after Abyss, we obviously moved into the current raid, Emirgisel, and been a solid few weeks. It's only been about a month and a week, a month and 2 weeks, I'm not sure, but it's been a good time so far on this raid. My guild of Aid, we're as of this last week, we're 3 out of 9 mythic, and my other guild is 6 out of 9 mythic, so it's like kind of nice that like they're sort of like they're going to kind of line up, even though I still think Evade might be, a couple weeks behind getting all the way up to Smolderon. I think we could kill every boss before Smolderon, but until I kill the boss on Mythic and WoW, I won't really know if Evade can kill it. But I think we can. I mean, especially if we keep playing just for like months and months, we'll eventually have to try, I guess. Yeah, Dragonflight for me has been extremely long-winded, and finally maybe wrapping it up a little bit. Dragonflight's been good. It's been overall positive changes for me in my life, kind of. I lost my original job at the very start of Dragonflight, my job I worked at for 10 years. I lost that job, and then I got to essentially play Dragonflight for 8 months, 9 months, until I had to get a new job. I mean, unless you can count streaming. That's like another reason why I like Dragonflight. It was the first, obviously the first expansion I started streaming in, and streaming's been its own sort of reward. Doing like YouTube content as well. Like I really enjoy making YouTube content, even if, in a moment like exactly like this moment, I'm struggling just to kind of like sit and record, just because like I've been talking for almost an hour straight, but it's still really fun, and I enjoy editing videos, even if I'm still not the best at it, but I'm getting better at all things. And I wanted to include these because I still think it's important to talk about them as far as the overall game is concerned. Even if they're not necessarily expansions, they are still kind of like new versions of WoW. And looking back a little bit for me, World of Warcraft Classic, I don't know if I should include Hardcore and Season of Discovery into this, but I personally think Classic, for me, was B, like a B tier kind of addition to the game. Just not necessarily that like it's actually bad, just more so that like for me, I could not keep up with playing Classic what happened to me when Classic came out is I tried to play like 2 warriors at the same time with like 2 sets of friends, like one with my guild, one with my main like Mythic Plus buddies, and I kind of just couldn't. I was leveling 2 warriors parallel through the worst, essentially the worst leveling experience possible, 2 warriors. So I kind of just lost my mind and I couldn't keep playing. I got two warriors around level 30 in original Classic, and I couldn't get any higher than that because I just kind of burned myself out playing 2 of the same class without really there being much benefit one way or the other. So kind of sad looking back on that like that, but yeah. Actually, I think I'm not gonna like, I'd still leave this here, but I think I'm gonna actually move this down here because like I got like halfway through Classic. I would say I did play enough of it to rank it, but I think maybe putting it down here and didn't play enough at the time is also fair. And yeah, even with like Classic came out, the original Classic came out in 2019, and we did have like, you know, another kind of like COVID sort of time, of course, but that was also like when we were all doing BFA stuff, and I think I was just far more interested in playing BFA personally over Classic, so yeah, I kind of just didn't do it. And although, speaking of like didn't play enough at the time, I think I can actually put this up here. I for Burning Crusade Classic, this launched like during like halfway through Shadowlands, if I remember right. And what I did for TVC Classic, it was a little bit easier to play, just that I was more focused. I only played one character. I played a single warrior, and I did a fresh TVC Classic warrior, and I leveled it from 1 to 70. And I did want to raid and stuff, but I never got around to it, sadly. I essentially did all like the fresh level 70 dungeon experience. I did like every single dungeon. And I had fun playing it, but I couldn't really keep up with it, sadly. Just like the original Classic, there was just other things in retail that were a little more interesting. Like I think TVC came out like a little bit after Sanctum of Domination came out, and if I remember correctly. I'll probably put a little edit of like the time of when both things happened, but yeah, TVC Classic was I had fun. I leveled up. I got to 70. I could finally. It's like the only version of Classic I've ever hit the level cap of, except for Season of Discovery. But the level cap is only level 25 at the time of recording, so that's not exactly a huge accomplishment. But it's like the only version of Classic I've ever been able to actually get to the end game start. So TVC was good in that regard, but other than that, I kind of just fell away. Like I went back to retail. I couldn't keep up with it, and then I'm sure everyone is curious about the fact that I didn't play at all at the bottom of this list, and indeed, this tier belongs just to Wrath of the Lich King Classic. I couldn't even I did do the Wrath Classic, like the pre-launch event of essentially playing a Death Knight through the starter zone to get the mount. That's been the only thing I did with Wrath of the Lich King Classic. Other than that, I haven't played it at all. But like looking back on it, besides doing Ulduar progression in like original Wrath, the only reason to have played Wrath of the Lich King Classic would be to do Ulduar, and that would have been fun. But at the same time, I just wanted to play Dragonflight because like Wrath came out in September of 2022, and then Dragonflight came out 2 months later. So there just wasn't really enough time. Like I could have made time for it, but there just wasn't really enough time for me at that specific moment to give Wrath its proper go. But I also, like, kind of looking back on it, they announced Cataclysm Classic at BlizzCon, And I think I could go ahead and say I would throw that in this level as well, because I don't think Cataclysm was all that bad, but I don't think I won't necessarily want to replay it. Just being fully honest about it. So, I suppose that's my my World of Warcraft expansion tier list, and that was a voice crack. Hi, Treggyz in the edit here. I kind of had a terrible outro, so I figured I'd just kind of sit here and re-record it and just kind of simply say thanks for bearing with me through this tier list. I kind of halfway through, I kind of just sort of got really like long-winded with some stuff, and I still had fun recording it. Just to kind of like trying to talk for like an hour straight is a bit of a challenge still for me. So thanks again for watching this video and other videos of mine. Hopefully somehow this video convinces you to subscribe if you even make it to this point. I would hope so if you made it through almost a full hour of this stuff. So I will let you go, and thanks again for watching once more. Even in my edited version, it's still going to be a little scuffed, so just what you can expect here. Have a great night. See, even now I'm doing it. I just don't know how to finish it sometimes.